Due to extreme heat across all of California, the California Independent System Operator that runs the state's electric grid may require PG&E and other electric utilities to turn off power for short periods of time, called rotating outages or rotating blackouts. This is a letter I got from PG&E, our electric provider. Now all they do now, because of deregulation, is they distribute power. They don't actually generate it like it used to be. They generated it and distributed it, but the California Independent System Operator is the guy that manages the supply and the demand. So they tell the guys that produce electricity how much to make so that they can send it into the distribution system. PG&E, Southern California Edison, whatever. And this whole thing now has become extremely complex because of the deregulation that was to help us citizens. And now what we are is we're in the richest country in the world. We're in the most high-tech state of that country, and we have rotating blackouts like some third world country or something. What the heck is going on? What's the deal with this whole thing anyhow? And then, of course, what's the question, which is, what do you do? What do I do? What can we do as consumers to help ourselves and to help manage the grid so we don't have this stupid rotating blackout thing? Well, what we need to do is find out how this stuff works, and then what we can do to flatten the curve. I'll get into that in just a minute, but we need to flatten the power curve actually in the afternoons when it's really, really hot. We should probably do it anytime, but we'll just talk about the hot days right now. So how does all this work? Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about physics, because physics is fun. So I'm going to talk about thermodynamics. How many of you know what the second law of thermodynamics is? Probably most people don't, but a few people do. It talks about entropy. That's kind of an interesting word. Most of you have probably heard of it, but you might not know what it is. Basically what it is in a closed system like our atmosphere, all the heat that's in it is trying to get evened out. So if there's a bunch of heat over here and it's real cool over here, this heat wants to run over. And it's always trying to get even. It's really a strong force too. Let me tell you, it's like really powerful stuff. So heat's always trying to even it out. So if it's 103 outside and your house is a nice cool 75, there's a lot of force trying to get that heat in. It's trying to come in. It's coming in through cracks, coming in through the windows, coming in through the ceiling, the walls. However it can get in there, it's coming in and it's going to get you. And that means you're going to be hot unless you do something to separate the heat. And you have to do that actively. There's a lot of things you got to do to keep the heat apart if you want to be cool in the summer or warm in the winter. It works both ways. The heat's always trying to get even. It always wants to even out. That's the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. So you could say you learned something about physics today. So, with that's going on all over the place, what do we need to do? Well, we need to flatten the curve, and how we flatten the curve is we keep the heat out when the curve's low, so that we don't need to have so much heat being pulled out when the curve's high. So we'll get into that in just a minute. As a race though, we've come up with a bunch of management tools. The management tools we have are like insulation. We put that in the attic, we put that in the walls, whatever it is. You know, fiberglass, the stuff you get all over you and you want to wash it off with alcohol, right? Now insulation's good stuff, but it doesn't actually stop entropy. All it does is slow it down a little bit. So when the heat's outside and it's all really, really, really hot and it's trying to get in through the attic, the insulation just makes it take a long time, and by the time it gets into your house, it's nighttime again and things can kind of cool off. So it doesn't really solve the problem, but it does delay it a little bit. So you have that for the double paned windows, that reject the heat and insulate. You've got reflective roof sheathing. There's all kinds of things like that have to do with insulation. And what that does, all the insulation does is all passive. You don't have to put any energy in to keep the heat out. Or in the wintertime, you keep the heat in. So that's insulation. That's a great thing that we've come up with. But that doesn't always work completely, obviously. And if the heat's in, how do you get it out? So we got to take the heat out. The first way we came up with as a race is we came up with these things called fans. And we were blowing like this, and then we came up with all kinds of other things. But a really good one you can use is a box fan, like a 20-inch box fan. Works really great. And if you have two of them, it's even better. You put one in one end of the house, one in the other end of the house, and they take about 60 watts. So like a 60-watt light bulb's amount of power, which is pretty good, moving, about 1,800 cubic feet of air a minute. So you can turn over the air in your house in maybe, I don't know, half an hour or so, maybe an hour, something like that. And so if it's cool outside at night, you put a couple box fans in. And that takes the heat out. Remember, the heat's gone collecting in through the day. At nighttime, you can kind of pull it out. Another thing that people use is a whole house fan. Now, whole house fans are really cool. We have one in our hallway, and it takes the heat out of the house and blows it through the attic and out. So heat that's collected during the day, when it's cool at night, we open up a bunch of windows, the whole house fan runs, and it just circulates that out, and all that heat goes outside. When it's cool outside, we bring in the cool air, takes the heat with it, and runs outside, and by morning, the house is sometimes at like 68 degrees or something. We close it all up, and then we don't have to run the air conditioner, because we already took the heat out, so we don't need the air conditioner to do that. Another way that what we could do that people have come up with is an evaporative cooling system. Swamp coolers, they're really great. So what happens, and this is another thermodynamics thing, so just beware. When water evaporates, it takes heat with it. So one way you can learn that is to think about that is when you put a pot on the stove, you've got to heat it and then it evaporates. Well, if you force the evaporation, it pulls heat from somewhere. So if you force the evaporation, you can actually pull heat out of the air. So you got hot, dry air outside, goes through this little moist thing, and then it evaporates, and that takes heat out. So you get about 15 degrees or something like that, lower temperature air going into the building. Now those things draw about something like 1,000 watts. So remember the fans were like 60, and then the whole house fan's about 500. The evaporative cooler is like 1,000 watts. That's a kilowatt. So if you're running out for an hour, it's a kilowatt hour. You're paying 35 cents or 50 cents. That's going to cost you 50 cents an hour, something like that. Anyhow, that will cool your house somewhat. But if it's 103 outside, it's not going to get to 80 in your house. It'll be warmer than that and more humid. So then we came up with this thing called air conditioning. Oh, the great joy of air conditioning. It works so well. Most people think what an air conditioner does is blow cool air into the house. But actually, what an air conditioner does is pull heat out of the house. See, we take the air that's hot in the house, we run it through the fan into this thing that takes the air in and moves it from the air into this fluid, and then we run the fluid outside, and that is what takes the heat out with it. So if you go outside in the yard, you know that thing that's on the ground and makes a lot of noise, you put your hand over the top of that on a hot day and it's blowing a lot of heat out. Where did that heat come from? That heat got pulled out of your house because it leaked in, because it's trying to get in there, because it's trying to even out. So the heat gets in, and then this thing, it kind of pulls it out. That's what air conditioners do. But air conditioners take a lot of energy to run. Average air conditioner takes about 4,000 watts. So if you're running that for an hour and you're 50 cents a kilowatt hour during the summer, that's about $2 an hour, and you run that a lot of hours during the day, that's a lot of bucks per day. And if you've got 30 days in your month, all of a sudden you're spending a lot of money on your air conditioner to pull heat out. Because remember, the heat's getting in, you're pulling it out. So maybe if we just thought about, how can we make it so we can pull less heat out? We don't have to do that so much. That's how we can flatten the curve. So those are different management tools we have, but a lot of people don't know all the ins and outs of how we can use these different tools to try to save money and try to make it so the curve is flat. So let's talk about the curve. The demand on the electrical grid. So what we have is the demand curve right here. This shows you 5 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, noon right there, and then you get around about 4 o'clock, and man, there's a lot of demand. This is like a huge gob of energy. This is 45,000 megawatts of power in California. 45,000 megawatts is like it's an engineer, it just rolls in the back. I can't believe how much energy that is. It's just a huge amount of energy. And that's sort of what we're trying to manage in the afternoon. That's the demand. So they're projecting the demand, and then they have the actual demand. And as the day rolls on, of course, it gets cooler in the afternoon and the evening, and then the demand goes down. But right around between 3 and 9 is really the hot spot. That's when the peak is really high, and we want to try to lower that peak. So what do we do? Well, we have a couple of different methods. We got hydro, we got solar, we got wind. That's our excellent renewable sources of power. Then we also have gas-fired boilers, these big huge things. Like around here, there's the Pittsburgh power plant and the Antioch power plant. Great big gargantuan, 100-foot high boilers with gobs of water, I don't know how many thousands of gallons of water. And they heat them up with gas. They just big fire in there and it gets all hot, and then they run that through a turbine. And that takes a long time to get that whole system running and get the heat up and all that other stuff. Along with hydro also takes a long time. You don't just flip the dam open and all of a sudden a bunch of water runs and you can have power. This all has to be scheduled over time. So these guys take this thing and they try to project what tomorrow's going to bring and get the boilers fired up and get the hydros working. And of course the hydro guys have problems because they can only let so much water down the river at a certain time, and yeah, it's complicated. So these guys have this really, really complicated job to try to manage demand with the supply. And then when you look at solar, hey, solar's great. I've got solar. This is solar from my house Monday last week. Nice, perfect day. Beautiful curve, but look at 4 o'clock. This thing's pretty much rolling off the edge. It's not producing much. And look at the demand at 4 o'clock when I need it the most. So that's not working. And then yesterday was a cloudy day, right? So a cloudy day is even worse. Who knows what we have? These guys are trying to juggle all this stuff and keep our grid running. So I understand the problem they have. And the best thing what we can do is try to manage the demand side. Because the supply is kind of a hard, complicated thing to figure out. So that's the supply-demand problem that they're trying to manage. But what about you? What can you do? How can you help to make your life better and to keep the grid running and all this other kind of stuff? I got a bunch of ideas of how we can flatten the curve. First of all, talked about the heat's trying to get in. The best thing we can do is keep the heat out. I know that sounds kind of silly, but really that's what we got to do. And there's a lot of ways that people bring heat into their house. They don't even think about it. It just comes in kind of stuck to them, right? It's just coming in all over the place in this stuff they do. So one of the things, first thing, is the sun is like this really great big super, super, super hot thing that's just like blasting heat on us all day long. And you know, it's great because otherwise we'd freeze to death. But with the sun beating on us, we should probably keep it out of our house if we want to keep our house cool. So that means you need to put blinds up. Now blinds outside are really great. You put them out on the house on the outside and the sun can't even get to your windows. We have a bunch of those on the back side of our house because in the afternoon it just bakes out there, so we have these blinds we put down. The other thing is to have curtains on the inside. And when the sun's out, close those things. In the morning, once the house is cooled down, sun comes up, close your blinds, close your windows. Keep that sun out, out, out. That is the biggest source of all heat that we know in our lives pretty much. Another couple of things that people don't think about though are cooking. Don't cook in the house when it's really hot. I know that sounds kind of silly, but what happens? People come home, the air conditioner's running, the house feels comfortable, and then they start making dinner. And they're running the oven, they're running the stove at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Right there at the time when we need to not have the demand, we're pumping a bunch of heat into the house, right? So that's kind of a problem. So what do? Use the grill. My wife and I the other day, she loves pizza. She likes to make her own pizzas. And so she's like, maybe we can do the pizza on the grill. And I'm like, that's interesting. So we looked at that a little bit. She's got one of these great little ceramic pizza making things. And we went ahead and made it on a Weber grill. Charcoal grill, made pizza. It was awesome. But we didn't bring any heat in the house. That's the big thing. No heat went in the house when we did that. And you can also have dinner with, you know, shrimp and seafood and things like that. You don't have to cook. Try to keep your dinners cold. Go out, whatever. Keep the heat outside. Don't bring it in. There's another one that's kind of interesting that a lot of people don't think about, and that is your car. Cars get really hot sitting outside in 103 degrees. I mean, it's hot out there. The whole thing, the frame, the insides, the seats, everything gets 100 and, I don't know, inside the car it's like 120 or 130. And then you bring that thing in your garage and put it in there, and all that heat's going to get out. It's going to go in the house. Now, fortunately for you, perhaps, your garage isn't below your bedroom like it is in my house. That's the worst thing because the heat just goes right up into the bedroom. So we don't put our cars in the garage when we come home. We leave them in the driveway. The other thing is the engines are like really hot. There's like fire going on inside those things. So the engine gets like really, really, really hot, and then you go put it in your house. And all that heat has to go somewhere. So leave it in the driveway, or have an electric car like we do, which makes it so you have less heat. But in any case, don't bring that heat in, because there's usually not insulation between the garage and the house, and so that hot car, heat's just gonna go right in, and guess what? Then you're gonna expect the air conditioner to grab that heat and put it in a little pipe, send it back out in the yard. That costs a bunch of money. 4,000 watts, that's a lot of power. All right, so the next thing you can do is you can think about pulling the heat out when it's cool outside. You can use the outside cool, because what happens, remember I said the heat's trying to get out? Well, if there's more heat in your house than there is outside, it wants to run out. It really does. So you got to help it. You got to help it get out there. So what you can do is you can open up. Like say in the evening it's like 70 degrees or 75 degrees and the house is 80 or something like that. Take a box fan and put it in one window. Put it in the window where the wind tends to come into the house that direction, blowing in. And then on the other end of the house, take another fan and blow out. It sounds kind of weird, but that's what you do, because the cool air will come in one side and the fan on the other end is going to blow that heat. You got to get that heat out. That thing's going to, you want to get the heat out of your furniture, you want to get it out of the counters, the floor, the seat. You got to get the heat out. There's just heat all over the place that got in during the day. You got to get it out of there. So use the fans to just kind of move the air through the house. Another thing you can do is things like I said with the whole house fan. That works. I mean, that's just brilliant. That's great. Sometimes you might need to get those window locks, you know, so you can hold the windows open a little bit so you can have air coming in all night long so you can get that heat out. But just think about pulling the heat out at night when you have that opportunity. Then in the morning, you can close the house up and your air conditioner doesn't have a job to do because the heat's already out. Then it just kind of has to hold on and maintain it. Another thing is manage the time of use for your air conditioner. So this is something, this will get a little technical or whatever, but if you notice the curve, there's plenty of capacity in the power right here. This is where it gets really bad. So what if you ran your air conditioner in the morning and in the early afternoon and that kind of time frame, really cold. So set it for like 76 or something like that, or 74, way lower. They say set it at 80 or whatever. Set it at 74 or something like that until about 1 or 3, right in that time frame, and then kick it up to 80 or 81. And what will happen is it'll be pulling heat out all morning long. That heat that constantly tries to get in there, it just keeps taking it out, taking it out, and taking it out, and then you get to like 4 o'clock and you can just flip the thing off pretty much, because the house will have, all this heat will already be gone, and as the heat leaks in, it's not going to be uncomfortable, and you can kind of live with it as it goes up to 78 and then 80 and 81 or whatever, and then after that, we're off the curve again. Maybe you can run it, or maybe it gets cool outside. So that's the kind of this idea of time of use, managing your, when do you do different things. Now another part of that that's really important is when do you do your stuff like laundry, dishes, all that kind of stuff. Because those things, besides the electricity they use, they also put heat into the house. The dishwasher heats up the house when it dries them. The dryer leaks heat all over the place. Oh my gosh, dryers are really bad for heating up your house. You don't want to put that heat in there. So what you do is you do them at like, I don't know, use the delayed setting if you got it and run the thing at midnight, or get up in the morning at like 6 o'clock and do your dishes and your laundry and all that stuff then, before it gets warm outside and before there's a big demand on the thing. Try not to put the heat in the house. Just make it so that it's at the time when you got the windows open and the fans are running or whatever. Don't do it when the grid needs you don't want to add demand to the grid. Okay, so that's a couple things about managing your time of use. So that's another thing you can do to flatten out the curve, to shift that demand to different times. Basically, all we're trying to do is push some this way and push some that way, so we don't need much of any energy right around 3 to 9 o'clock. Just kind of not using that. All right, very good. So with all that, I think a little focus, and you can probably flatten the curve. And you know what we can do is we can save money, and we can be more comfortable in our homes. And it also helps with the grid. It's like it's a win-win-win all the way around. So think about these little things. I gave you a lot of stuff, but maybe there's just a couple that are really good. All right, well, thanks a lot. I'm Mike Lafferty. Any other questions, let me know later.